Hi, everybody. So this is day 12, which is chapter 26 of To Kill a Mockingbird. And when we left off at the end of chapter 25, there was that very ominous and ominous line of foreshadowing where Mr. Yule was heard to say, "One down, two to go." And so I asked you at the end of the previous video to consider who you thought that those two more to go might possibly be. We know that Tom Robinson was the one down, as he is killed in chapter 24, but now we're left wondering who those two others are. So in chapter 26, it continues with Scout and Jem returning to school. It's September, and so Scout is now in 3rd grade. It is September of 1935, which would mean that Jem is now in 7th grade because they're 4 years apart. And just to remind you, the novel started in 1933, the summer of 1933, when Scout was just about to enter 1st grade and Jem was just about to enter 5th grade. So 2 years have gone by in your tale here, and we're still waiting to find out how Jem gets his arm badly broken at the elbow, which was the teaser in the first line of the novel. So the importance of this chapter is that, kind of like in chapter 24, it exposes the hypocrisy that Harper Lee saw in our society. So if you remember in chapter 24, the hypocrisy was on the part of the women in Anne Alexandra's missionary society, and they feel so awful for this African tribe, yet they show no remorse for Tom Robinson's conviction. And in this chapter, it's the same concept, except this time it's Scout's teacher, Miss Gates, as well as her classmate, Cecil Jacobs. So if you're thinking of the time period, it's 1935, and if you know your history, we're just a few years from World War II, and at this point in 1935, Hitler has come to power in Germany, and you're starting to see, Americans are starting to hear about the persecution of Jews in Germany and in many places in Europe. And so in this chapter, Scout's sitting in 3rd grade, and her class has a discussion about persecution and has a discussion about democracy and what that means. And Scout really identifies, she's maturing, that her teacher is a hypocrite. Her teacher talks about how America is this wonderful place because we have equal rights for all people and how everyone is treated the same. And yet Scout mentions at the end of the chapter that she doesn't understand how Miss Gates can speak that way about equality in America and democracy when on the evening of the Tom Robinson trial, Scout heard Miss Gates coming out of the courthouse saying that she was satisfied with the verdict in the Tom Robinson trial. She made a comment. I'm going to go to the end of the chapter. On page 331, Scout says, "Well, coming out of the courthouse that night, Miss Gates she was going down the steps in front of us. You must have not seen her. She was talking with Miss Stephanie Crawford. I heard her say it's time somebody taught 'em a lesson. They were getting way above themselves, and the next thing they think they can do is marry us. Jem, how can you hate Hitler so bad and then turn around and be ugly about folks right at home?" And there you go. There is the hypocrisy that Scout is understanding on the part of her teacher. How can you say that Hitler is doing something awful and feel awful for the Jews being persecuted in Europe, but yet you not understand that it might not be over religion, but there's people within your own community who are experiencing inequality and persecution and death because of the color of their skin. Scout sees that as well with Cecil Jacobs, who, when he stands up, he has brought in this article to class, and he mentions to Miss Gates that he doesn't understand why Hitler hates the Jews so much, and he says they're white, ain't they? And so you see the train of thought in this 3rd grader, that he doesn't understand why they're being persecuted. They're white. In his mind, the only people who are inferior are people who are a different skin color. And so you see the racism that's so deeply ingrained in this society. And that's really what Harper Lee wrote this book for. As I told you guys when we were together, she wrote this book not just to tell a story. Of course, there's a plot here and there's a storyline that you follow, but the purpose of this book was to show Americans what it was like, what their society was like, to show them their shortcomings. She wrote this in 1960, right at the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, and she wanted to put a mirror up in front of America, and she wanted America to look at it and say, you were outraged by what Hitler did? Why aren't you outraged by how you behave towards people who are right here in your own community? And that was really the purpose in writing this book. And that's why I think all these years later and 40 million copies later, it's still a book that speaks to so many people. So if I'm looking at my questions, and a copy of the answer key is available on my website under school closure resources. The first question there says, what is so hypocritical about Cecil's reaction to his current event article about Hitler? And the answer is A. He's outraged over the killing of the Jews in Germany, but he's not outraged over the treatment of the blacks in Macomb. Cecil is the kid who, from the beginning of the book, is tormenting Scout about Atticus's decision to take the case. So we know where he stands on Tom Robinson, and yet how can you be upset about what Hitler does, but not upset about what's happening in your own backyard? The next question says, the fact that Scout feels a sense of remorse over having tormented Boo Radley shows that she is, and the answer is B, that she's maturing. Now, I know we haven't heard about Boo Radley in many, many chapters, but as I told you, there is this connection that will come through. And so the fact that she mentions when she walks past the Radley house now on her way to and from school, she feels sad about how she treated him and about the games that they played and how they tormented him. It does show us that she is now maturing and she's starting to realize the error in her ways. The last question asks you to explain how this chapter reveals that Miss Gates is a hypocrite and to cite evidence. So I did go over that, how she feels awful about what's happening in Germany, but she doesn't feel awful about what's happening or what happened to Tom in her own community. So, I pulled the line from page 329 where Miss Gates tells the class, we don't believe in persecuting anybody. She speaks about how in America, we have equality and everyone's equal here. And she writes in big letters on the board, democracy. We are a democracy. And yet the hypocrisy is that line that I read to you where on page 331, when she's walking out of the courtroom the night of the trial, she expresses to Miss Stephanie how pleased she is with the verdict and how it was time that they, meaning the African American community, were taught a lesson. So that's really the importance of chapter 26. It shows you, just like in 24, the hypocrisy of Americans when it comes to race. Think about Atticus's closing statement where he referenced the Declaration of Independence, where he says, all men are created equal. Harper Lee keeps coming back to that theme. She keeps coming back to that topic of equality because she wants readers to see we really aren't as equal as we think we are or as we portray ourselves to be. So I hope that was helpful, and that's chapter 26.